Good evening and welcome to tonight's program. My name is Alex Rosenberg and I am the Senior Director of Development here at Tikvah. It's wonderful to spend this 8th night of Hanukkah with our closest friends and supporters, both here in our New York City office and with many more friends on Zoom all across the country. We are living through a historic moment for the Jewish people. Our brothers and sisters, including many of our colleagues at Tikvah Israel, are on the front lines tonight defending the state of Israel against enemies who seek our destruction. At the same time, American Jews are witnessing a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism and an unraveling of our elite institutions, the media, academia, and our greater culture. What is Tikvah's strategy in this moment? And what is our greater vision to strengthen American Jewry? This is the topic of tonight's conversation. We are joined this evening by Tikvah CEO Eric Cohen and Dan Senor, host of the Call Me Back podcast, which I highly recommend if you're not already a subscriber, and author of the newly released book, The Genius of Israel, The Surprising Resilience of a Divided Nation in a Turbulent World. Eric and Dan will be in conversation for the first 30 minutes or so, after which we will take a few questions. For those joining us on Zoom, please feel free to use the Q&A button and type your questions in throughout the program. We will try to get through as many questions as possible. Thank you again for joining us tonight. And Eric and Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's not great to talk about 2023, just sort of year in review and where we go from here, because obviously October of 2023 has been traumatic, to say the least. And I guess I want to start, Eric, and we'll have time to get into what Tikvah's doing, but I'm just curious for your bigger picture thoughts and observations about what we've learned about the Jews and the Jews' place in the world post-October 7th. My immediate reaction on October 7th was that I perhaps naively believed that the outrage of the world after the barbarism of the October 7th massacre would be directed, the outrage would be directed at those who committed the massacre. And what I would have never imagined, and again, perhaps naively, and perhaps without an eye towards history, what I would never have imagined is that the world's outrage would be directed at the Jews for objecting to being slaughtered. And so I guess my first question for you is, have you been surprised?
Look, I don't think anyone can watch what's going on our college campuses and our schools and our media and not be shocked at the vividness of the assault on Jewish people, Jewish ideas, the state of Israel. So, outraged, yes, but shocked, surprised, no. I think whenever the West finds itself in crisis, whenever the West finds itself in a kind of hinge moment in its own history, the Jews, this tiny little people, always seem to be at the center. And I think this is a moment that for sure has emboldened anti-Semitism. The haters of the Jews are more emboldened than ever, but the friends of the Jews are also more emboldened. We shouldn't lose sight of that side of it as well. But I think we make a big mistake if we settle for a kind of surface analysis of the assault on Jews, on what anti-Semitism is. It's not just a form of prejudice. It's not that they dislike us. It's not just that we're a small minority. I think it's because in a couple of fundamental ways, the Jews cut to the heart of the crisis of the West, and that the assault on Jews is the kind of inversion or perversion of Jewish exceptionalism. And I think we have to think more deeply about what's really going on. So I would highlight three kinds of things that this really puts a mirror on the soul of our civilization. One is, before October 7th, we were living in this quote-unquote wokeness crisis. And a lot of people were awakened for the first time, perhaps, at just how crazy some things had become in our schools and in our universities.
Before October 7th.
Before October 7th. And, on issues of gender, on critical race theory, on the kind of assault on, the idea of meritocracy. And so I think the first thing to say is that Judaism is like the antithesis of wokeism. that Jewish ideas, the biblical ideas, Hebraic ideas about the unique dignity of men and women, about the meaning of the family, about moral responsibility, about what it means to live under commandments rather than to be the author of your own existence.
What it means to be part of a community.
Exactly. Wokeism is like Leviticus upside down.
Right.
And the Jews stand for something else. And so the fact that they're now under assault sort of is understandable. I'd say the second thing is the Jews have been the symbol of meritocracy in America, meaning it's only a couple generations back when many of our fathers and grandfathers were poor, came here like other immigrants, and the Jews have flourished in unbelievable ways. And they flourished in unbelievable ways because of their own ethos of work and education, and America has been a land of hope and opportunity. Well, the progressive ethos of our universities and of our elite culture says, no, meritocracy is a fraud. The world is divided between the oppressors and the oppressed, and we need to destroy this whole idea of meritocracy. We need to have an army of DEI administrators that have a different vision of what justice really means. And it's only in that perverse universe that Hamas activists and LGBTQ activists can stand together and celebrate bombing Tel Aviv. It's a perverted worldview. But then again, the Jews are the symbol of American meritocracy in many ways. And the final thing I'd say why I'm not surprised is that Israel, in their mind, is the symbol of evil nationalism. And so if your image of the good society or the good world is the UN image, well, Israel for decades has been singled out in the most irrational ways at the UN. Think of all the nations of the world that engage in the most immoral and insane and perverse and tyrannical behavior, and yet it's Israel, a decent and even noble democracy in the heart of the Middle East, the moral capital of the West, as Leon Kass powerfully put it in his Herzl Prize address, that's singled out. And so Judaism is the opposite of wokeness. Judaism is the symbol of meritocracy. Judaism is the symbol of nationalism. That's why the Jew is under assault. This is an assault on the West. It's not an assault on the Jews. And to end on a more hopeful note, something you've written and talked a lot about, Israel's also the only nation of the world that has affirmed the future by having children. And so Israel is actually the symbol of hope. Mm-hmm. It's not the struggling nations of Europe. It's not even America whose birthright has collapsed. Mm-hmm. It's the Jews who are the symbol of the endurance of the human spirit by passing down from generation to generation. And so the issue is not about prejudice. It's not about that they dislike Jews. They don't dislike our noses. The Jew in these hinge moments of history symbolizes what the West stands for at its best and what it can become at its worst. And that means we have a responsibility not only to save ourselves, but to save America and the West. That's what this moment, I think, is all about.
And it's not about winning arguments about double standards, right? Like I see many of these arguments, many Jewish groups, which I understand, are making the argument, how are they criticizing Israel, calling Israel a colonial state, calling Israel out for disproportionate deaths of Palestinians? Do you know how many Sunni Muslims were killed in Syria during the Syrian civil war? It's not what these arguments are about. It's not what these debates are about.
And look, the last thing we want to, the worst lesson we could learn from this moment and that our young people could learn is that we want to be another voice in the victimhood choir. They don't like us either. We want the nanny state to protect us. Now, look, obviously it's absurd that Jews are being subjected to double standards on these campuses. Obviously, if it were said about any other racial group, what has been tolerated and said in these universities, it would have been outrage and heads would have rolled, and yet there it depends on the context. It's obviously ridiculous. But let's not lose sight of what the real struggle is. This is a struggle for the heart and soul of the West. And the enemies of the West are using the Jews in their campaign to destroy us. And the friends of the West are looking to the Jews as a source of inspiration and admiration for what can be happen. That's why when you go to a Christian college, there are Zionist flags flying, even when there isn't a Jew within 500 miles. Because we are a symbol of what they want to destroy, and we are a symbol of everything they want to aspire to. And we should live up to this. And we're living in this great awakening moment for American Jewry because many American Jews are finally seeing that the way they thought the world worked is not the way the world really worked. And the people they thought were their friends maybe aren't their friends. And that's why I'm actually hopeful. It's been a dark period, but this is an awakening moment. And if we seize it, then the Jews can seize their purpose again in history.
Let's talk about college campuses. I can't think of a demographic in the United States that has made a more outsized commitment and investment in elite American colleges in the 20th and early 21st century than the Jewish community. Let's start with, what do you think our community thought they were getting with that investment? Because I guarantee you they did not think they were getting pogroms, on these college campuses. So what did we think, our community think we were getting by this outsized investment in elite American academic life?
So, look, let's start in a positive sense. For many American Jews going back a couple generations, the chance to study in these schools was an incredible gift, an incredible opportunity. It was a chance, I worked as a tailor. I worked, in a more working class profession, but my kid's really smart, and he got to go to these schools, and now he's become a banker. Meaning that's the ascent story of American Jewry, and it's a wonderful story in many ways. And universities at their best serve that purpose. But then something went awry, and these universities since the 1960s have been in a decadent decline, these temples of elite academic culture. But American Jews still have seen them as their temples. And like good citizens, because Jews are incredibly generous and philanthropic, they want to pay their dues to their temples. They're just sending their money to the wrong temples. They're sending it to Harvard and Columbia. And what hopefully we're realizing now is that many of those temples have the wrong gods and they're broken. And they're not going to get fixed. We have to look at this and not say, okay, we have to run away because we're not safe. We have to look at this situation and say, these places are not worthy of Jewish talent, Jewish energy, Jewish creativity, Jewish money, and we can build more beautiful temples of learning.
So abandon these schools, because there are still some of the best students coming out of the best Jewish day schools in America who still want to wind up on these campuses. Do we tell them these places are a waste of your time and energy now, and we're going to redirect you, or do we want to back them up and invest in these kids who are on the front lines of these campuses?
It's a complicated story. Tikvah works with so many incredible undergraduates who are on these campuses today and who are leading with moral clarity and Jewish courage the fight against this insanity. And I'm so proud of these young people, and they have really been voices, of strength. And they're going to get a kind of education that's very useful of what it means to have to be courageous under fire and what it means to have to understand and make your case more effectively than everybody else because the professors are against you and the administration is against you and the majority of your students are against you. That's a kind of education. But it's also a missed opportunity to live in opposition and exile your whole life. And so I am very skeptical that the Harvards and Columbias and Penns of the world are going to change. And it's fine, we'll get a few college presidents forced out, and I admire the donors that have stood up courageously against this. I respect them greatly. But then you have to look at the departments of these places. Go through every member of the history department of these universities, the social science departments, the literature departments. These places are so ideologically grounded in this intersectional worldview that I don't think reforming them should be the strategy. I think there are other universities that we could partner with. I think there are other types of institutions we could build. And so I think we have to build new oases of Jewish excellence, and that's where we should want to send our kids. Not in flight and not to be isolated from the rest of America, but quite the opposite, because I think part of the purpose of Jews is to help strave America, to strengthen America, to renew America. That, I think, is our calling. It's our words on the Liberty Bell. That bell's got to be rung again. And it's not just the bell of liberty, it's the bell of American excellence and American renewal and the strengthening of American culture and the American family. We have so much to offer this country. But we're not going to do it by telling our young, most talented 18-year-olds, go to Harvard, live in hiding, Make sure that the menorah gets hidden after you light it. Keep your head down and get a job at McKinsey. That's not a great strategy. We have to tell them they should go to places that admire them and where they'll get a serious education and where they can learn how to make a contribution to America. I am skeptical that that's at Harvard or Penn or all these other places. But that said, we're going to keep arming the young people that go there with the Tikvah community and Tikvah idea. That's a big part of our work. But I think we have to be thinking bolder and bigger if we're going to fulfill our potential as American Jews.
Okay, I want to talk about a few of the sort of modules or areas of focus that Tikvah is zeroing in on. K through 12. We talked about college campuses. We'll come back to college campuses. Talk to me about where your focus is on K-12.
So as I think about the years ahead and the sort of big things we're trying to do, I sort of think about teachers, schools, colleges. Obviously, all of this has to be informed by a set of ideas and a worldview and thinkers like Meir Soloveichik and Ruth Weiss and Mosaic and all these things that we do that are kind of like the intellectual nuclear core of Tikvah. But I want to start with teachers, meaning because I think teachers have always been the kind of heroes of Jewish civilization. And we launched about a year ago the Lobel Center for Jewish Classical Education, which is first and foremost an effort to find the great teachers around the country that exist and to bring them into this whole tradition of Jewish classical learning, to build out a whole new K-12 curriculum, to tell the Jewish story of the West in new ways and how we impart it to our kids. And so we're now working with, many, many dozens of day schools. We had 100 teachers through this program this summer. We're building an army of educators. But I think the big new thing, which we haven't announced, it's not a plan yet, but it's a big idea, is what I would call Teach for Judea. Meaning many people have probably heard of Teach for America, which was an incredibly successful effort to get idealistic young people, many of whom are going to go into law and go into banking and go into medicine, but to give as an act of service a couple of years of their life after college to education. And so it was a way to get a lot of very talented people into classrooms working with young people, some of whom then stayed in education. Well, we have a bunch of idealistic young Jews in college today who have been, heard the summons of Jewish civilization. We need to draw them into the field of Jewish education. We need to think like the Mormons, right, who have 2-3 years of service after college, which is formative for them. The most important act of service can be getting some of those young people, by the dozens and eventually the hundreds, to go into Jewish education. Because if you're a Jewish day school in Tampa or Jacksonville or Houston, you're starved for talent. And if we can create a community of teachers that goes around the country and brings Tikvah ideas into not only Jewish day schools, but then also can teach in programs like Millstone Scholars, where we're bringing together 7th and 8th grade kids, and now we're in 20 cities, we're going to get to 100 cities, who are learning our curriculum in an intensive way with this army of young teachers. That's, I think, mission one. We have to build the army of educators, because the only enduring answer to anti-Semitism is Jewish confidence. The only enduring answer to the assault on the Jews are Jews who know what they stand for, why they matter, and what their Jewish lives mean. And if we don't build those people, then our fate as American Jews will be in crisis. If we do build those people, this can be a moment of Jewish renewal unlike anything we've ever seen. So that's mission one, is the teachers.
I will say, just on the point you're making, it's not, since October 7th, I've been struck by the number of people who've gotten engaged in Jewish life, on fighting anti-Semitism, on defending Israel, and people who've never, Jews who have been philanthropically engaged in a whole range of fronts, but never on Jewish causes, are like in the fight now. The only challenge is they view it as a fight, and only as a fight. And I think it's important, and I think Tikvah can play an important role, that Jewish living is not just about being oppositional. It's not just about fighting against the negative. It's about Jewish literacy. It's about Jewish ideas. It's about Jewish identity. It's about community. It's about Zionism. It's about the flourishing life that can come from a Jewish life, not just about the fight.
Yeah, the greatest source of hope will be, those 30-year-old new parents for whom this has been a great awakening. They're thinking for the first time about, well, what does it mean that I'm a Jew and I have a couple of young Jewish kids, to think in new ways about how to raise those kids. Because if this is only about fighting against our enemies, then it will pass. If it's an awakening that leads to actually fertilizing the soil of Jewish life and Jewish flourishing and Jewish upbringing, passing something down, then it could lead to something great. And I think, and the second thing you asked about schools, and that's the second key area of focus, I think this is a moment when more families are going to be thinking about full-time Jewish education than they ever have before in America. Families that have been on the outside looking in, that have been in public schools or have been in the Dalton kind of schools, they are now more open than ever to coming into Jewish education. And so I think Tikvah's got to make a big investment in the K-12 Jewish educational sector. We made a decision a few years ago to start working younger and younger and younger, and we've done that. Our Truman Scholars Program now, we've got 60 day schools that are nominating their very best 7th and 8th grade kids. And they see it as such a gift because we're teaching them about the meaning of American Jewry, about the heroes of Zionist history. It's from like Washington's letter at Newport to Natan Sharansky, and it's a course of study that they see as incredibly valuable. And so we're going to continue to build our Tikvah tentacles into every existing day school. But I also think there's an opportunity to build new schools. And I think those schools can serve both a market of Jews that are going to come into Jewish education for the first time, and they can also serve eventually markets that are going to grow. Places like Austin and Tampa and Jacksonville, these cities are going to see Jewish population growth, and we want to help make it the norm in those places to get a Jewish classical education, a Jewish education that really is rooted in the kind of Tikvah set of ideas.
So talking about creating new institutions, how do you react to when people say, look, we gotta create competitors, disruptors against the big elite universities, against the big elite middle and secondary schools, and the reaction is, good luck. Those institutions, yes, they're ripe for disruption, and they have hundreds of years of history on their side, and they have massive endowments, and good luck posing a real disruptive challenge against them. It sounds great in the moment, but it's like the 30-year war.
Yeah. I think that the answer has got to be a combination of things. One, a certain boldness, meaning that you believe it's possible. Two, a certain patience that, you know, the seeds of something great, a great oak is not come overnight. You have to have some amount of nurturing patience. And third, you got to be prudent, because where you can work with existing institutions, of course you should. Meaning the spirit shouldn't be either work with the existing day schools or build new schools. We're going to try to do both. But look, I always go back to Herzl. Meaning I've been obsessed with Herzl in this moment because he saw in Europe a crisis. And what he was obsessed with was not just the danger for the Jews in Europe. It was that anti-Semitism would destroy European civilization. Meaning what was at stake was not just the health and safety of the Jews. What was at stake was the West itself, and the Jews were a symbol of the crisis. And when he made the case for building the Jewish state, the establishment said exactly what you just said. It's too hard, it's crazy, it's a desert, it won't work, it can't happen. And he put together a kind of ragtag group of people and had what we now know as the First Zionist Congress, and he made them wear tuxedos and act as if they were building
and had them schlepped to Basel.
Exactly.
And it wasn't like there was easy air travel.
And in the moment, if you were part of the elite establishment of the Jewish world and of the general world, you would have thought he was crazy. But now when you look back, and he said maybe it'll take 5 years or 50, and it was 50 to the dot, then you have the Jewish state. So I think we have to have the courage to build. And certainly if you think about it in business, right? Meaning the greatest company in the world today is probably Amazon. It's an impressive achievement. It was nothing. It was this crazy guy selling books in a basement who had a vision to build something. Think about the media world. You know, I've used this metaphor. It's not that I love Fox News so much, but imagine 30 years ago if you said, well, look, we can never compete with CNN. Maybe we can get one good reporter in there and it'll be a little more balanced. At some point, you have to say no. You've got to build new things. And I think Tikvah has already become, I think, an institution that means something in the Jewish world, that has a real community of students and teachers and faculty and supporters and donors, and it's been humbling to see it grow. But the Jewish Parents Forum now has thousands of people. One of the things we're going to address is the whole crisis of what social media is doing to our kids, and we're bringing together 50-day schools that are going to try to articulate a better policy of how to deal with this. We had thousands of people the other night at this event we did with Jonathan Haidt. So I think the answer has got to be it is possible to build, and there are no more creative builders than the Jews. When we are focused, we do great things. So it's teachers, it's schools, and then it's the colleges. I'm happy to talk about that for a minute.
Why don't you do that?
Yeah, meaning I think.
And then we're going to open. Then we'll open up.
I think the curtains have been open on the crisis of the universities that was very deep long before October 7th. And I think Jewish families now are thinking for the first time that they're open to other kinds of alternatives. And so Tikvah has been focused the last couple of years on trying to envision if we had our own college, just as a thought experiment, what would our BA education look like? Meaning, if instead of working with great college students for 8 weeks in the summer, we had 4 years, and the purpose was to educate the next generation of leaders, what would that look like? And so we've put some very amazing people together who have laid out a vision of how to do that. And I think now this is like a plan that may have its moment. And the question of how to do it is still nascent, meaning I think there may be ways to partner with a lot of existing schools that are very open to this vision and to incubate an exodus. And that's really the way we need to think about it. Meaning, I think Birthright Israel was one big idea that changed the face of Jewish philanthropy and changed, in important ways, Jewish life. I think the next big idea has got to be the exodus of Jews from universities that are broken to places that are not. And that will mean creating oases of Jewish flourishing in a lot of existing places that would love to have more Jews. If you're on these moms listservs like my wife is, it's like hot schools start to pop up. You want to know one of the hot ones now? The University of Alabama. So you got Northeastern Jews that are now obsessed with the University of Alabama.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. The one of the most exciting places is going to be
You heard it here.
One of the most exciting places is going to be the University of Florida. Ben Sass has provided incredible leadership. There are amazing things that are going on there. Obviously, Yeshiva University is poised for tremendous growth. There are places that are going to become the new centers of Jewish excellence and that will not tolerate Jews but celebrate them, that will not ghettoize Jewish ideas but put them at the center, that will not be worried about are Jews safe, but will be proud that Jews are central to the cultural life of those campuses. This is going to happen. And where Tikvah fits in is I think we can help envision what that BA ought to look like. But we also have a pipeline now of hundreds and hundreds of the most talented Jewish high school students that are Tikvah students. We're going to be bringing a bunch of them together to our National Student Leadership Conference, including one of your kids, in a month. And we can help steer those kids toward better opportunities and steer their parents away from the mentality that it means something to put that Harvard or Penn sticker on the back of their car. Because it's the wrong God to worship. And there are other ways to educate great young Jews than those places. So those are the three big things that we're thinking about. Building teachers, changing and strengthening and expanding the reach of Jewish education in the K-12 space, and then thinking in a fundamentally new way about college. Because this is the great awakening moment. I hope it's a Tikvah moment. It's been exhausting because there's been so much to do the last couple months. It's not as if we didn't work hard already. People at Tikvah have always worked hard. But I've actually never been more hopeful about what's possible. That's where I am.
Let's open it up.
The lure of so-called elite universities has not only been the opportunity, yes, but also the relative security of having a job after graduation. So how can we ensure similar security for students that are willing to forego attending these universities for ones that endorse Western Jewish ideas?
Look, I think the first thing to say is a place like the University of Florida is already an elite university. Meaning the average SATs, if you pay attention to these things, at the University of Florida are like 1450 today. Meaning it's not an easy school to get into. And it has tremendous resources. And so
Same with the University of Texas.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
If you're
Meaning-
out of state,
Yeah.
it's actually hard. It's pretty.
or you look at a school like Hillsdale College, which has basically no Jews. It's an elite school. It's attracting incredibly talented young people. They're a place that would love to work with Tikvah, that would love to work and have more Jewish students. And so I think what will make these schools elite is, one, they're going to attract clusters of excellent students that will become a community. In the humanities and social sciences, they can hire the best people in the world, because the best people in the world are not welcome at the literature and history departments in the established universities. I think the thing that's the hardest is the hard sciences, and so one has to be sober about that. Meaning, there you're not going to compete easily with MIT. You're not going to compete easily with the Caltechs of the world, not in the beginning. And so you have to recognize that if what students want is to pursue excellence in those fields, then there's a good case for them going to the legacy places. But what they need is the mentality of not, I'm going to keep my head down and just be the sort of Jew in the closet, but no, I'm going to achieve excellence in engineering, but I'm also going to be a proud Jew who understands what technology should live to serve, which is human flourishing, and Jews have a lot to contribute to that. And then my mentality on the way out isn't going to be, can I get a job at some existing place, but can I be a builder? Meaning, I think if Jews in a sense, this will be funny coming from me, we've come a little too conservative. Meaning, conservative not ideologically, but conservative in the sense that
risk averse.
Right, and because we've made it in America, which means we have a lot to lose. We have a lot of claims on our resources, and I don't want to be cavalier about risk, but I think this is a moment where Jews have to be a little less, we're going to follow the track, from Dalton to Princeton to Goldman to Harvard Business School back to Goldman. That's great, but it's not so great. And I think that's what we have to think about. And I think, look, as someone who hires also lots of young people, a lot of the most talented people that I interview, which is hundreds of people, interviewing all the time, they're not necessarily coming from these schools. Talent rises, and that's what will ensure that people get jobs.
Yeah, on Wall Street, more and more firms are saying if they have their choice, they'd rather take a top-performing student from a state school than a mediocre student from one of these elite Ivy League schools. And also they're finding that many of these students coming from some of the elite Ivy League schools are so afraid of their own shadows because they're so protected in terms of don't offend, don't trigger, this one's a snowflake, this one. And so they can't be in a conference room and have a debate with senior executives or make their case for anything. It's the exact wrong environment.
It's clearly right. Look, I want to be clear. We also work with a lot of great kids that are at these schools. Incredible kids that are at Columbia and Princeton, Harvard. The students are great. What is so painful to me is that in many cases they've been deprived of a great education. And it's like going to college shouldn't only be about living in opposition. And if you literally talk to our own students, and these are very level-headed young people, they literally describe being in these schools as if it's like living in Soviet Russia. That's how they feel.
Yeah.
And if I had said that 10 years ago, people would have said, you're crazy. But now the world is confirming that, no, it's not crazy. And if I had said 10 years ago to a bunch of college students at Tikvah, look, we're thinking we should build a new college, they would have said, well, that sounds nice, but that's a little nuts. Now their reaction is, that sounds awesome. I wish I could go there and maybe my younger brother can. It's just changed. In the last 10 years, it's really changed.
Yeah.
I'm
Go
gonna take
ahead.
a question from one of our supporters on Zoom who asks, if we build alternative colleges, what will happen to the current leading universities and their professors that remain? Won't bad ideas continue to gain traction there?
So look, two things I want to, meaning one, I want to be both bold and modest. Like building a major university from scratch, that's a very gigantic undertaking. I think we've got to think about, we have this educational vision and we have this pipeline of students and we have a moment of opportunity. How do we begin to seed alternatives? And then some of them could grow. And could that be working with some existing places, building some things of our own? Obviously, it's a little easier to enter the K-12 space, a little easier to build a kindergarten or a sixth grade than a college. But to get to the heart of the question, look, it's like saying, you know, well, what if all the Jews leave Europe and build Israel? What's going to happen to, you know, to Europe? And my answer is, the Jews that stay in Europe should fight and be courageous and try to help Europe. But our first priority has got to be to build a flourishing Jewish life. And I think if our mission in America is the Jewish renewal of American civilization, and I think that is a part of our purpose, I think Jews have a calling to help strengthen America, I don't think we should be focused on saving Penn. I think we should be focused on saving America, and I don't think Penn is worthy of our talent right now. And so if those places, and I have to be frank, I don't think these places can get much worse. So if the worry is that we're worried they're going to get worse, then they're already kind of pretty bad. And so sometimes you have to cut your losses and build new things. And I also think, if I could just add one other thought, the inertia of prestige means many Jews are going to still go to these places no matter what they do. Those that can get in. It's not so easy to get in anymore. Meaning if you're a nice 1,500 kid from Westchester, you're not getting into the Ivy League schools. That you're not that special anymore. But there will be some very talented young Jews who go. And so my philosophy is I want to make the case for bold alternatives, but I also want to continue to work closely with those great students who do go, and you have to have both strategies. But I don't have to persuade them to want to go to Penn. I have to persuade them to be open that there may be other ideas, and then if they decide to go to Penn, to help them.
I think it's a great idea to try to get more Jewish kids enrolled in Jewish day school. That's the best antidote to intermarriage and assimilation. And we're losing too many Jews to assimilation now. I think the biggest obstacle to many families, even those who can afford tuition, is they don't want to pay when they might have good public schools in their neighborhoods. How do we convince them, or how can we philanthropically help them?
So a couple thoughts. First is, if you ask me before October 7th, and I think my answer would still be the same, what is the most important public policy priority for Jews, and I would even say for America? It's school choice. And what we've now seen in Florida is the first serious, not the first, one of the, in a Jewishly high populous state, an incredible expansion of education savings accounts. And it's going to lead to a supply side entrepreneurial growth, which it already has, of kids in Jewish day schools in Florida. And so part of the answer to the tuition problem is school choice, because there are a lot of families that are probably inclined toward Jewish schools. They're a little on the fence. Some of it is about identity. Some of it is about money. Well, now those that were on the fence, the identity impulse is pushing strongly in a Jewish direction. And what you have to do is marry that to the economic impulse, and school choice is the best answer to that. I think the other answer to it is all Jewish philanthropy, all this money that was going to pay for, you know, the building at George Washington that was paid for with nice Jewish money that then was like a site for Hamas slogans.
Yeah,
Did everyone
illuminated.
see those
Yeah.
pictures? You
Yeah.
know, in bold lights on the library? Well, Jewish philanthropists should be obsessed with one thing: Jewish education. Any Jew that's sending their money to Harvard should send it to day schools. Any Jew that is sending their money to other vague, universalist causes, it's great. Send it to Jewish education. Because I think if you care about the West, then you should care about the Jews. And therefore you got to care about grounding them in their own history and heritage. And so what I hope is that there'll be a kind of philanthropic awakening that will shift some of the significant Jewish resources into the arena of Jewish education, and that will strengthen the economic position of day schools. That's what I think. And by the way, marrying that with more day schools, which will put competitive pressure on the schools to keep their prices reasonable, as opposed to adding 900 administrators that keep the Jewish prices going up. And so if you can marry those things, school choice, philanthropic reprioritization, and more competition, this should be a blossoming moment for Jewish primary and secondary education.
One of our supporters on Zoom, Larry Zeifman, asks, some of us are less optimistic about the future of Jewish life in North America, but we are very optimistic about Jewish life in Israel. Where do Aliyah and educational work in Israel fit into Tikvah's vision?
Look, it's a great question. Dan, you are the prophet of Israeli optimism here, so we should let you weigh in on this, obviously. But Israel is living through a momentous moment of challenge, but I think ultimately I'm deeply hopeful about Israel.
Yeah, I mentioned to you before tonight, I have on my podcast every week Haviv Retik-Gur, who's a journalist an analyst for the Times of Israel. And we do, since October, we started on October 8th, we record a conversation every single week that we post on our podcast every Monday morning. Now, late Sunday night we do it. And he was just in the U.S. for the first time since October 7th. So he was just here for about a week, and he was doing a bunch of public speaking. And he spent Shabbat with us last weekend. So I said, all right, so you've spent the last couple months in kind of what looks like hell, and which is the post-October 7th war, and then you spend a week in the United States with American Jews. What's your reaction? And he said, the reality is I'm very hopeful about Israeli Jewish life. He's like, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay because we have a sense of purpose, we have a sense of resilience, we have a sense of optimism. The country's coming together in ways that people could never have imagined, although we laid the case for how Israelis would come together in our book, which is strategically placed over there.
Of course.
And he said that all this hysteria about how divided Israel was actually overstated before October 7th. He says, but most importantly, we have agency. We actually can seize moments. We actually not only are fighting back as the 380,000 soldiers that were called up and are fighting back in Gaza, but we're also fighting back in terms of kind of refounding the state. He says, the American Jews I've spent time with, what I'm most worried about is the sense of they feel like sitting ducks. They feel that they don't have agency. They feel that in the diaspora, there's not much that they can do, and I'm actually more worried about them than I am about us. We'll be okay.
Yes. Look, any Jew who feels summoned to make their life in Israel should. I mean, what a thing to celebrate. What a wonderful purpose. And I can't tell you how much I admire and how moving it is. My son goes to Frisch, which is probably the biggest modern Orthodox high school in the country, and they have so many of their alumni serving in the IDF.
Yeah.
It's incredibly moving. And these young people that have this sort of sense of Jewish purpose and service and courage to leave a comfortable life in Teaneck and go serve their people in Israel, it's just tremendous. But I also, I do think at the deepest level, of course, the fate of Jewish history is going to turn on Israel. But the fate of history is going to turn on America. And America needs the Jews. The Jews have a purpose here. And I think those Jews who feel summoned to make a contribution to the renewal of American civilization, a uniquely Jewish contribution, we have a purpose here as well, a noble purpose, an elevated purpose. But it starts at home, meaning if we have to build flourishing oases of Jewish life so that we can fulfill our purpose in American culture. And I think this is a moment, I always go back to this line that Milton Himmelfarb had that predicted the future of American Jewry is fewer but better Jews. And I think there will be a decline in the overall size of the American Jewish population, but I think there will be an incredible deepening of the level of commitment, strength, confidence, rootedness of the American Jewish population. And then over time, it will grow again. So in the short to medium term, I'm sort of hopeful about renewal. And in the long term, I hope that American Jewry can live up to its purpose in America. But that is not, to me, in tension with the view that any American Jew that feels called to Israel, they should go. They should be encouraged to go. They should be celebrated. They should be praised.
And they'll probably they'll lead a great life.
Exactly.
So it's a great place.
But those who stay here should see themselves as having a responsibility for America. It's not just that America was a land of opportunity for the Jews. Now America needs the Jews to give back, because America is in a kind of crisis right now, and it needs Hebraic remedies for American disorders more than ever. That's the moment. And if that's not a noble purpose, I think you started with this with your book about what people need in life is a purpose.
Totally.
This is a purpose.
Right.
It could resonate with our young people.
Right.
Just no one talks this way.
Right.
That's where Tikvah can make a contribution, I think.
Right. The people need a story, a big story. I mean, that's what Israel's about. That's what Jewish life should be about, that like being able to access a really big story, literally of biblical proportions, and then have a hand in it, like shaping it. Like this is, okay.
We have another question from Zoom from our supporter Kurt Byron, who asks, what are the Jewish first principles that Tikvah believes should be taught as part of a new Jewish college curriculum?
That's easy. So I can't do full justice to that. It's a great question. But I would basically focus on three things. One, I think on the deepest, most enduring questions of human life, love and death, justice and injustice, creation and commandment, the fundamental drama of being human. The Jews have very deep things to say. And so a great Jewish college has got to seize the wisdom of the Jewish tradition on the enduring human questions and then look at it alongside, respectfully, other alternative visions of the human life, Greek and Roman and modern, and where what we will discover through that inquiry is just how fundamental the Jews are. We have to be the teachers of the West when it comes to the human soul and human nature. And a great college has got to ground young people in that. I think second is every young Jew has got to learn how to think about the great practical questions of the modern age. We just lost Henry Kissinger. Mm-hmm. Well, young Jews should study Henry Kissinger. Whether you like him, you don't like him, you agree with him, you're not. He's someone that had to grapple with the great challenges of statesmanship. And we need to learn from Thucydides and from Clausewitz and from Adam Smith and from Tocqueville and from Kissinger himself how to think about the practical questions of the day and then actually really drill down. How are we going to deal with the crisis of the family? How are we going to deal with the transformation of work in the age of AI? How are we going to deal with the new challenges of nuclear deterrence? Jews who want to be citizens and statesmen have to think about those problems. And then I think the third thing a Jewishly oriented college has to do is surround young people with models of excellence who have done things in their lives that matter. I think college professors are indispensable to college education, but it seems to me absurd that your only adult role models for 4 years are college professors. That's a narrow sliver of wisdom. And you need to expose young people to men and women that have had to run something, that have had to make hard decisions, that have built something from scratch, that have had pastoral responsibilities, whatever the different vocations you want to go into. I don't think colleges do enough to integrate men and women of affairs into the actual course of study, because I think the most important way you learn is by studying models of excellence. It's why you need Plutarch. Meaning that's more important than philosophy, is biography, because the right biography especially living biography, which is what mentors are. That's how you learn. So I think a great college would combine those things, a real attunement to the enduring human questions thought about Jewishly, a real attunement to how to be a good analyst of the great problems of human life, modern human life, and how to deal with them, the great civic and political problems. And then young people need models of excellence. And one of the things I see often coming out of these elite schools, coming out of all schools, but including the elite schools, is that young people are trying to figure out what their purpose is. They may be very smart and they've studied a bunch of stuff, but they haven't been around enough people. Mm-hmm. And I think we could be much more creative integrating that into a college curriculum.
Want to take a couple from here?
Sure. Just wait for the mic.
You spoke about the importance of Jewish education, day schools, and I couldn't agree more. As a mother of a young child, even in the New York area, I've found that it is very difficult to find Jewish day schools that are not modern Orthodox, that are also not infiltrated by the wokeism. How are you, and that was not the case 10, 20 years ago. Are you working with those institutions, and do you think there is hope for them to get away from some of that, the wokeism, the gender issues, all of those things?
Yeah. So, great question. Look, I always try to work with anyone that we can work with. And what we found in many day schools is sometimes you can work with the schools, and they've been incredible partners. Meaning we're working with probably 100 Jewish schools in different ways today. And sometimes you can't really work with the schools, but you find teachers within those schools that are great, and you can work with them, and that's great. But I think in the market that you just described, which are Jews that are not necessarily coming from an Orthodox background, maybe that's not the model they're looking for, but they actually want a serious Jewish education, they want a more traditional value system, they want a positive orientation toward America, they want an education oriented toward excellence. I think there's an opening there. And so one of the projects that we're working on is exactly that, meaning to see if there might be a market for a network of schools in different locations that are open to all Jews of whatever background and denomination, as long as they're committed to passing down a Jewish identity to their kids, and that are, I don't want to say they're not woke, because that's to define it in the negative, but it's that they believe in these high things we've been trying to talk about tonight. They believe in Jewish civilization. They believe in America. They believe in the West. They believe in liberty, rightly understood. That's ingrained in the curriculum. And so I think that market is ripe to be served by new institutions, and stay tuned.
And I think that...
Meaning for what we're going to do on that, because that's something that I'm very, very focused on.
And I would just add, I think post-October 7th, I think is going to rinse out some of the more extreme wokeism in Jewish day
in the
schools.
Existing schools.
Yeah, I think October 7th was a wake-up call. That's akin to what you and I were talking about before we came in here, about just generally where the American Jewish community is politically.
No.
That it's sort of a wake-up call about the circles many were traveling in and how they were not necessarily natural allies.
Yes, look, the compass of many American Jews has been disrupted, and they're trying to figure out what's true north now. And it's not so easy to see, but one thing that can be true north is a recovery of their own Judaism. Meaning, any Jew looking for a compass should subscribe to MeirSoloveitchik.com. They can spend their entire lives listening to lectures and podcasts. I don't know how he produces this amount of material. It's still a marvel to me. But he's telling the Jewish story in a way that is engaging to Jews of every kind of background. And that's got to be the answer. It's what you said, Dan. You can't just live in opposition because they dislike us. You have to then take the next step of building a Jewish soul. And that comes through learning.
Right.
I know we have many more questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. Eric, Dan, thank you so much.
Thank
This was
you.
really a terrific conversation.